Marcus Kane felt the cold metal of the broken ship cutting into his back. His breathing came in short, painful bursts. The crash had thrown him hard against the control panel, and now something warm and sticky was running down his face. Blood, he realized. His blood. The dropship lay twisted around him like a broken toy. Through the cracked window, he could see the strange red sky of this alien moon. 3 suns hung in the distance, casting weird shadows across the rocky ground. This was supposed to be a simple mission. Get in, scan the enemy positions, get out. Nobody said anything about getting shot down. Kane tried to move his left arm. Pain shot through his shoulder like fire. Broken, probably. His right leg felt wrong too, bent at an angle that made his stomach turn, but he was alive. That had to count for something. The war with the aliens had been going badly for 3 years now. The Vorthak had better ships, better weapons, better everything. Humans kept fighting because they had no choice. Earth was their only home, and these lizard monsters wanted to take it. Kane had joined the military when the aliens first attacked. He watched his home city burn from space while enemy ships rained fire from above. His wife Sarah had been in that city. His daughter Emma, too. He never saw them again after that day. Now he was Staff Sergeant Kane, part of the human resistance. His job was to gather information about enemy movements. The brass said information was their only advantage. Humans could think differently than aliens. They could find weaknesses where others saw only strength. A sound made him freeze. Heavy footsteps on metal. Something big was walking on top of his crashed ship. Kane reached for his sidearm, but his hand came up empty. The weapon was gone, probably thrown somewhere in the crash. The footsteps stopped. Then came a sound like tearing paper, but much louder. Whatever was up there was ripping open his ship like opening a can. Kane closed his eyes and tried to control his breathing. If he was going to die, he would die fighting. Sunlight flooded in as a huge piece of the ship's hull was torn away. Kane opened his eyes and saw them. 3 Vorthak soldiers stood looking down at him. They were even bigger than the intelligence reports said. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies. 4 arms hung from their shoulders, and their heads looked like a cross between a crocodile and a snake. The leader wore more armor than the others. Colored markings covered his scales in patterns that Kane did not recognize. When the creature spoke, his voice was deep and harsh, like rocks grinding together. "Still alive," the leader said in broken human language. "Interesting. Most humans die quick on this world. Air too thin. Gravity too strong." Kane said nothing. His military training told him to give only name, rank, and service number if captured. But something told him these aliens did not follow the same rules as human armies. "I am Warlord Thexkalar," the leader continued. "You are now my prisoner, human. What is your designation?" "Kane Marcus, Staff Sergeant, service number 7749. One of the other aliens made a sound like laughing. "It speaks the ritual words." "Like a machine." Thexkalar held up one clawed hand for silence. He studied Kane with yellow eyes that seemed to see everything. "You are damaged but alive. Your species is known for being difficult to kill. This creates opportunity." They pulled Kane from the wreckage with surprising care. His broken bones screamed in protest, but he bit down on his pain and said nothing. One of the soldiers injected something into his neck. The world went fuzzy around the edges, but the pain faded to a dull ache. "Medical treatment," Thexkalar explained. "Cannot have prize dying before games begin." Kane tried to ask what games, but his tongue felt thick and heavy. The drug was pulling him toward unconsciousness. As they carried him toward their ship, he caught glimpses of the alien vessel. It was huge and black, covered in weapons and armor plating. No wonder his little dropship had been shot down so easily. The inside of the ship was dark and cramped. Everything was built for creatures much larger than humans. They put Kane in some kind of medical pod that sealed around him like a coffin. Through the clear walls, he could see alien doctors working on his injuries with tools he did not recognize. His last clear thought before the drugs took him completely was about the word Thex Kalar had used. Prize. What kind of prize was a broken human soldier? And what were these games he had mentioned? When Kane woke up, the pain in his shoulder was gone. His leg felt normal, too, though both limbs were stiff and sore. The medical pod had done its work. Through the walls of his prison, he could see stars moving past. They were traveling through space, but to where? Days passed in the pod. Aliens came and went, studying him like he was some kind of rare animal. They fed him through tubes and monitored his body with their machines. Kane used the time to think and plan. He was still alive, which meant they wanted him alive. That gave him an advantage, even if he could not see what it was yet. On the 5th day, the ship stopped moving. Through his pod, Kane saw a planet growing larger in the view screen. It was red and brown, with no visible oceans. Desert world, he thought. Perfect place for aliens who looked like lizards. Thex Kalar appeared beside his pod as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Welcome to Bloodsand Prime, human warrior. Here you will provide entertainment for my people. If you fight well, you may live long enough to regret being captured. Kane stared back at the alien commander with cold eyes. I am already dead, he said quietly. Dead men have nothing to lose. For the first time, Thex Kalar showed what might have been respect. Good, the warlord said. The crowd will like you. As their ship descended toward the red planet's surface, Kane began to understand. He was not just a prisoner anymore. He was going to be a gladiator. The arena was bigger than anything Kane had ever seen. From his cell window, he could look down into a massive bowl carved from the red rock of Bloodsand Prime. The fighting floor was easily a mile across, with walls that rose up like a canyon on all sides. Thousands of Vorthak filled the seats, their scales glinting in the light of the 3 suns. Kane had been in his cell for 2 days now. The room was small and bare, with just a sleeping mat, a water dispenser, and a waste unit. The walls were made of some kind of energy field that burned his skin if he touched it. He had tried only once. Other cells lined the corridor outside his door. Through the small windows, he could see the other prisoners. Most were creatures he had never seen before. There was something that looked like a giant spider with too many legs. Another cell held what appeared to be a walking tree with glowing eyes. In the cell across from him, a creature that resembled a massive wolf paced back and forth, never stopping, never sleeping. These were the other gladiators, Kane realized. Creatures taken from dozens of worlds to fight and die for Vorthak entertainment. Most of them looked broken, driven mad by captivity and violence. Their eyes held no hope. Only the desperate hunger of animals waiting to kill or be killed. Kane was different. He was still thinking like a soldier instead of a trapped animal. That would be his advantage. The guards were young Vorthak warriors, probably new recruits looking to prove themselves. They carried energy weapons and wore light armor, but Kane could see they were inexperienced. They stood too close to the cell doors, talked too loudly, and followed predictable routines. Kane watched everything. He counted the guards during each shift change. He memorized their patrol routes and noted when they were most and least alert. He studied the technology of his cell, looking for weaknesses in the energy barrier or the door mechanism. The guards thought he was just another animal in a cage. That was their mistake. On his 3rd day, they came for him. 4 guards surrounded his cell while Thex Kalar watched from down the corridor. One of them deactivated the energy barrier and gestured with his weapon for Kane to come out. Kane stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. No point in fighting here. Better to see where they took him and learn more about the facility. They led him through a maze of corridors carved from the same red rock as the arena. The walls were covered with alien writing that Kane could not read. Pictures showed Vorthak warriors fighting various creatures in combat scenes that looked like they had been carved centuries ago. They stopped at a large metal door that slid open to reveal what looked like an armory. Weapons of all kinds hung from the walls: swords, axes, spears, and things Kane had no names for. Most were clearly designed for creatures much larger than humans. "Choose," said one of the guards in broken human language. "Choose weapon for first fight." Kane looked over the selection carefully. Most of the weapons were too big for him to use effectively. The Vorthak were built like tanks, all strength and armor. They thought bigger always meant better. Kane chose a simple metal rod about 4 feet long. It was not sharp, but it was solid and balanced. The guards laughed at his choice, saying something in their own language that sounded mocking. They fitted him with minimal armor, just a chest plate and arm guards that were far too large for his human frame. Then they led him to another door that opened onto the arena floor. The noise hit him like a physical force. Thousands of Vorthak were roaring and screaming in their seats. The sound echoed off the walls and seemed to shake the ground under his feet. Kane had never heard anything so loud. The arena floor was covered in red sand that looked like dried blood. Maybe it was dried blood, Kane thought. In the center of the massive space, a smaller fighting ring had been marked out with white lines. This was where he would fight. On the opposite side of the ring, another door opened. What came out made Kane take a step back despite himself. It was like a bear, but twice as large and covered in spikes that looked like black metal. 6 legs carried its massive body forward with surprising speed. Its mouth opened to show teeth like daggers, and it roared loud enough to hurt Kane's ears. The crowd went wild. This was what they had come to see. A small human against a creature that could tear him apart with one swipe of its claws. Kane forced himself to think like a soldier. What were the creature's weaknesses? It was big and strong, but that meant it would be slow to turn. The spikes covered its sides and back, but its belly looked softer. Its eyes were small and set close together, which meant poor peripheral vision. The creature charged at him with the speed of a freight train. Kane waited until the last second, then rolled to the side. The beast's momentum carried it past him, and its claws gouged deep furrows in the sand where he had been standing. Kane did not try to attack. Instead, he kept moving, forcing the creature to chase him around the ring. Each time it charged, he would dodge at the last moment, always moving to its blind spots. The crowd was getting restless. They wanted blood, not a running battle. But Kane was learning. The creature was fast in a straight line, but slow to turn. It was getting tired from the repeated charges. Its breathing was becoming labored. On the 5th charge, Kane was ready. As the creature lunged past him, he swung his metal rod like a club at its front leg. The impact ran up his arms like an electric shock, but he heard something crack. The creature stumbled and went down, rolling in the sand. Kane did not hesitate. While the beast was down, he jumped onto its back, avoiding the spikes, and drove his rod into one of its eyes with all his strength. The creature thrashed and screamed, but Kane held on. He worked the rod deeper until the beast went still. The arena fell silent for a moment. Then the crowd erupted in a roar that was even louder than before. Kane stood over his defeated opponent, breathing hard, and looked up at Thex Kalar in his private viewing box. The warlord was not laughing anymore. He was studying Kane with the same careful attention that Kane had been using to study the guards. As they led him back to his cell, Kane allowed himself a small smile. He had passed his first test. Now the real work could begin. Kane's second fight came 3 days later. This time his opponent was not an animal but a Vorthak warrior. The alien stood nearly 9 feet tall and wore partial armor that covered his chest and arms. His 4 hands each held a different weapon, a sword, an axe, a spear, and a curved blade that looked like it could cut through steel. The crowd cheered louder than before. They had seen Kane defeat the Spike Bear, and now they wanted to see how the small human would handle a real warrior. Kane chose the same metal rod as before. The guards had stopped laughing at his choice. They had seen what he could do with it. The Vorthak warrior was confident. He advanced slowly, all 4 weapons ready, expecting Kane to retreat as he had against the beast. Instead, Kane moved forward to meet him. The first clash lasted only seconds. The warrior swung his sword in a wide arc, expecting to cut the human in half. Kane ducked under the blade and struck with his rod at the warrior's knee. The alien stumbled, surprised by the speed of the attack. Kane did not press his advantage. Instead, he stepped back and began to circle his opponent. He was learning the warrior's fighting style, watching how he moved, how he held his weapons, where his guard was strongest and weakest. The Vorthak military trained their soldiers to fight other Vorthak. They expected opponents who would match strength with strength, who would stand and trade blows until the stronger one won. They did not know how to handle someone who fought like Kane. Kane struck fast and then moved away. He targeted joints and weak points in the armor. He used his smaller size to get in close where the longer weapons could not reach him effectively. When the warrior tried to grab him with his free hands, Kane was already gone. It took 15 minutes for the warrior to fall. By then, he was bleeding from a dozen small wounds and could barely stand. Kane's final strike shattered his sword arm at the elbow. The warrior dropped his weapons and fell to his knees. Kane could have killed him then. The crowd was screaming for blood, but Kane stepped back and waited. The warrior yielded, and Kane walked away. That night, lying on his sleeping mat, Kane heard a soft tapping sound from the wall of his cell. It was coming from the cell next to his, the one that held the spider-like creature. 3 short taps, then 2 long ones, then 3 short again. Kane recognized it. Morse code. Somehow the creature in the next cell knew human communication methods. Kane tapped back carefully on the wall. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The universal distress signal. The response came immediately. Letters tapped out in slow, careful rhythm. I am Zix 9. Kane tapped back his own name. Then he waited. Engineer, enslaved, 7 years. You fight different. Over the next several nights, Kane learned Zix 9's story through their tapped conversations. The creature was from a race called the Hexari, brilliant engineers who had been enslaved when the Vorthak conquered their world. Zix 9 had been brought to the arena as punishment for trying to sabotage a weapons facility. But Zix 9 still had his knowledge. He knew how the arena systems worked, how the power grid was laid out, how the security systems operated. He had been watching and learning for 7 years, waiting for a chance to escape. Kane told him about the war between humans and Vorthak. He described the battles he had seen, the losses humanity had suffered, the desperate need for any advantage they could find. I help you, came the tapped message. If you help us all. Kane's fights became more frequent. The crowds loved the strange human who fought like no creature they had ever seen. Each victory made him more valuable to Thex Kalar, who was gaining status among the other warlords for owning such an unusual gladiator. Kane faced cybernetic warriors with metal arms and energy weapons. He fought automated combat drones that moved faster than any living creature. He was thrown into environmental challenges where the arena floor became a swamp, a frozen wasteland, or a zero-gravity chamber. Each fight taught him something new about Vorthak technology and tactics. He learned that their cybernetics had weak points where biological and mechanical parts joined. He discovered that their combat drones had predictable programming that could be exploited. He found that their environmental controls followed patterns that could be anticipated. More importantly, he was mapping the arena complex in his mind. During the walks to and from his fights, he memorized every corridor, every door, every security checkpoint. He counted the guards at each post and noted their equipment. He identified the power conduits that Zix-9 had told him about. The other gladiators began to notice him too. Most were too far gone to be helped, but a few still had minds that could think beyond simple survival. Kane began to make contact with these few through small gestures and careful words. There was Krex, a four-armed warrior from a world that had been conquered decades ago. His people had been proud fighters before the Vorthak broke them. Now only Krex remained, kept alive because he was too valuable to kill quickly. There was Mora, a winged creature whose people had ruled the skies of 3 worlds before the invasion fleets came. Her wings had been clipped to keep her from flying, but her eyes still held intelligence and rage. Through Zix-9's tapping and whispered conversations during the brief moments when their cells were opened, Kane began to build a network. These survivors became his allies, sharing information about the arena's operations and the movements of the guards. Kane's reputation grew with each victory. The crowds began to chant his name when he entered the arena. They called him Ghost Walker because of the way he seemed to disappear and reappear around his opponents. Betting on his matches became popular among the Vorthak nobles. Thex Kalar moved Kane to better quarters, a larger cell with more amenities. But Kane knew this was not kindness. He was becoming too valuable to lose, which meant he was becoming too dangerous to his captors. One night, as he lay planning his next moves, Zix-9 tapped an urgent message through the wall. Important. Visitor. Coming. Supreme. Commander. Wants. To. See. You. Kane felt his blood turn cold. If the Supreme Commander of the Vorthak forces was coming to see him, it meant his activities had attracted attention at the highest levels. His time was running out. He tapped back his response. When? 3 days? Big ceremony. After that, we move or we die. Kane closed his eyes and began to finalize his plan. Everything he had learned, every ally he had made, every weakness he had discovered, it all had to come together in 3 days. He was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the chance to strike a blow that could change the entire war. Supreme Commander Vex Thoth arrived on Bloodson Prime with a fleet of warships that darkened the sky. From his cell window, Kane watched the massive vessels settle into orbit around the arena world. Each ship was the size of a city, bristling with enough weapons to destroy planets. Kane had seen intelligence reports about Vex Thoth during his military briefings. The Supreme Commander was the architect of the Vorthak war machine, the mind behind every major victory against human forces. If he was coming here personally, it meant Kane had become more than just entertainment. Zix-9 confirmed Kane's fears through their wall-tapping conversations. Commander wants to study humans, find weaknesses for war. The implications were clear. Kane's fighting style had revealed too much about human tactics and capabilities. Now the enemy's greatest strategic mind was coming to analyze him like a laboratory specimen. Every move Kane made, every technique he used, would be studied to find ways to kill more humans. Kane could not let that happen. Over the past weeks, he and Zix-9 had been working on a secret project. During his fights, Kane had been deliberately damaging certain pieces of arena equipment in ways that looked accidental. A broken sensor here, a damaged power coupling there, small components that were discarded as combat waste. Zix-9 had connections among the maintenance slaves who cleaned the arena after each fight. These forgotten creatures, invisible to their Vorthak masters, had been collecting the damaged parts and smuggling them back to Zix-9's cell through the waste disposal system. Piece by piece, they had been building a quantum communication transmitter. The technology was far beyond anything humans had developed, but Zix-9's engineering genius had found ways to adapt Vorthak components for their purpose. The device was tiny, no larger than Kane's thumbnail, and disguised as a piece of damaged armor plating. When activated, it could punch a signal through hyperspace to reach human forces anywhere in the galaxy. But it would only work once before burning itself out, and the power requirements meant it had to be triggered at exactly the right moment. Kane's chance came 3 days later, when Thex Kalar announced the Grand Championship fight. To honor Supreme Commander Vex Thoth's visit, Kane would face the ultimate challenge, single combat against Thex Kalar himself. The arena had never seen anything like it. The crowd was packed beyond capacity, with Vorthak nobles and military officers filling every available space. Viewing screens had been set up throughout the complex so that everyone could watch the spectacle. Kane was given his choice of weapons for the final time. He selected his usual metal rod, which now drew cheers from the crowd instead of laughter. They had learned to respect the simple weapon in the human's hands. Thex Kalar entered the arena wearing full battle armor powered by an internal reactor. Energy shields flickered around his massive form, and his 4 arms carried weapons that could cut through steel like paper. He looked like a walking tank, invincible and deadly. Kane had hidden the communication device inside his armor plating. As he walked onto the arena floor, he activated it with a simple touch. High above in orbit, invisible signals began racing toward human space, carrying everything Kane had learned about Vorthak tactics, technology, and troop movements. The intelligence data included detailed plans of the Kepler offensive, weaknesses in Vorthak ship designs, and the locations of hidden supply bases. Most importantly, it contained the coordinates of Bloodsand Prime and the deployment schedules of the fleet currently in orbit. Kane hoped Admiral Chen was still alive to receive the transmission. The last he had heard, human forces were retreating toward the inner colonies, fighting a desperate delaying action against superior numbers. This information could change everything. But first, Kane had to survive the next few minutes. Thex Kalar was not like the other opponents Kane had faced. The warlord was experienced, intelligent, and completely ruthless. He did not charge blindly or rely on brute force alone. Instead, he advanced carefully, using his energy shields to block attacks while his weapons probed for openings. Kane tried his usual tactics of speed and mobility, but the arena floor had been reconfigured for this special fight. Gone were the obstacles and terrain features that Kane usually exploited. Instead, they fought in a flat, empty circle with nowhere to hide. The warlord's energy weapons left smoking craters in the sand where Kane dodged. His powered armor moved with surprising speed, driven by servos that could crush bone with the slightest touch. Kane's metal rod seemed pathetic against such overwhelming technological superiority. For 10 minutes, Kane could do nothing but run and dodge. The crowd grew restless, expecting the human to fall at any moment. Supreme Commander Vex Thoth watched from the royal box with cold, calculating eyes, analyzing every move Kane made. Kane was bleeding from several minor wounds where the warlord's weapons had come too close. His armor was cracked, and his rod was bent from blocking energy blasts. He was losing, and everyone in the arena knew it. That was when Kane revealed the real plan. During his months in the arena, Kane had memorized every system, every power conduit, every control mechanism in the fighting floor. He knew that beneath the sand lay a network of gravitational projectors, environmental controls, and holographic generators that could reshape the arena for different combat scenarios. As Thex Kalar closed in for the killing blow, Kane dove toward what looked like an empty patch of sand. His rod struck a hidden control panel that Zix-9 had told him about weeks ago. The panel sparked and overloaded, sending feedback through the arena's computer systems. Suddenly, the flat fighting floor erupted into chaos. Holographic walls appeared and disappeared randomly. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly, making both fighters stumble and fall. Environmental controls activated simultaneously, filling parts of the arena with water, ice, and toxic gas. Kane had turned the arena itself into a weapon. In the confusion, he struck at Thexkalar's armor joints where the energy shields could not protect them. The warlord's left arm servo seized up, dropping one of his weapons. Kane rolled under another energy blast and smashed his rod into a power coupling on the warlord's back. Sparks flew from Thexkalar's armor as systems began to fail. Without his technological advantages, the warlord was just another large, slow target. Kane pressed his attack, using the chaotic environment to stay ahead of the weakening energy shields. The final blow came when Kane drove his bent rod through a crack in the warlord's helmet, finding the gap between armor plates that protected the alien's throat. Thexkalar fell with a crash that shook the entire arena floor. The crowd sat in stunned silence. They had never seen a Vorthak warlord defeated by a slave, especially not a small human with a simple metal rod. Kane stood over his fallen enemy, breathing hard, and looked up at Supreme Commander Vex Thoth. Even from this distance, he could see the intelligence and calculation in those alien eyes. The Supreme Commander was not angry or surprised. He was impressed. That was when Kane knew his real troubles were just beginning. He had proven that humans could defeat Vorthak technology and tactics. Now Vex Thoth would want to know exactly how he had done it. As guards surrounded him in the arena, Kane touched the hidden transmitter one last time. The device crumbled to dust, its work complete. Whatever happened next, the message was sent. Somewhere in space, human forces were receiving the intelligence that could turn the tide of war. Kane just had to survive long enough to see if his sacrifice had been worth it. Kane sat in his cell, waiting. It had been 6 hours since he killed Thexkalar in the arena. 6 hours since he sent humanity's most important intelligence package racing through hyperspace. Now everything depended on timing and whether Admiral Chen had received his message. The arena complex was in chaos. Thexkalar's death had thrown the command structure into confusion. Vorthak officers argued loudly in the corridors about who held authority. Supreme Commander Vex Thoth had sealed himself in the command center with his personal guard, studying recordings of Kane's fight over and over. Kane knew what the Supreme Commander was seeing. Human tactics that made no sense by Vorthak standards. Weapons used in ways that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Environmental adaptation that should have been impossible for an alien species. Through the wall, Zix-9 tapped urgent messages. Fleet, movements, above, something, happening. Kane pressed his face to the narrow window of his cell. In the dark sky above Bloodson Prime, he could see the running lights of Vorthak warships moving into new formations. They were preparing for something, but Kane could not tell what. Then he saw it. A brief flash of light at the edge of the system, lasting only a second. Then another, and another. Human ships dropping out of hyperspace. Kane's heart pounded as he counted the flashes, dozens of them spread across the system in a coordinated attack formation. Admiral Chen had not only received Kane's transmission, she had acted on it immediately. The intelligence about Bloodson Prime's location and orbital defenses had allowed her to plan a perfect surprise attack. But the human fleet was still outnumbered 3-1. Kane's information was only half the battle. The other half was up to him. He began tapping his own message through the wall, using a code that Zix-9 had taught him. Within minutes, the signal was spreading through the hidden network of slave workers and forgotten prisoners throughout the complex. Kane's message was simple. Now. The revolt began in the deepest levels of the arena complex, where the maintenance slaves worked in darkness and silence. These were the invisible ones, the broken remnants of a dozen conquered species who cleaned the blood from the fighting floors and repaired the damage from each battle. They had been waiting for 7 years. Zix-9 had prepared them well. Hidden weapons appeared from secret caches. Improvised explosives were placed at critical power junctions. Security doors were locked from the inside, trapping guards in isolated sections. On the gladiator levels, Kane's signal reached creatures who had been driven to the edge of madness by years of captivity. But Kane had shown them something they had forgotten, that their captors could be defeated. Krex smashed through his cell door with four-armed fury. Mora used her clipped wings to glide between levels, carrying messages and weapons to other prisoners. The arena's security systems, designed to keep prisoners in, became death traps when turned against the guards. Energy barriers that had held the strongest creatures suddenly opened to release them into the corridors. Automated weapons turned on their former masters. Environmental controls flooded guard posts with toxic gas. Kane's own cell door opened when the power failed. He found Zix-9 already free, the insectoid engineer's many arms working frantically at a control panel. "Main power grid," Zix-9 explained in his clicking voice. "Overloading the orbital defense platforms. Your friends will need help getting through." Above them, the battle for Bloodsand Prime had begun. Human ships darted between the massive Vorthak vessels like wolves attacking a herd of elephants. Admiral Chen was using every piece of intelligence Kane had sent her. She knew which ships had the heaviest armor, which carried the most dangerous weapons, which commanders were likely to make mistakes under pressure. The orbital defense platforms should have made the attack impossible. Their energy cannons could destroy a ship with a single hit. But Zix-9's sabotage had left them blind and powerless, firing randomly into empty space while human fighters slipped through their coverage zones. Kane fought his way through the arena complex toward the command center. He carried weapons taken from fallen guards, but he barely needed them. The revolt had become an avalanche that nothing could stop. Creatures that had been beaten into submission for years were remembering what it meant to be free. He found Supreme Commander Vex Thoth in the command center, surrounded by his personal guard and watching the battle unfold on tactical displays. The Supreme Commander looked up as Kane entered, his cold eyes showing no surprise. "The human," Vex Thoth said in perfect human language. "I wondered when you would arrive. Your plan was quite elegant. Use our own arrogance against us. Make us think you were just another animal, while you gathered everything you needed to destroy us." Kane kept his weapon trained on the alien commander. "It's over. Your fleet is broken. Your soldiers are dead. Surrender now and maybe some of you will live." Vex Thoth made a sound that might have been laughter. "You misunderstand the situation, human. I am not your enemy anymore. You are my teacher." The Supreme Commander activated a holographic display showing the battle above. Kane could see that Admiral Chen's fleet had indeed won, but the cost had been terrible. Half the human ships were destroyed or crippled. The survivors were barely holding together. "Your species fights with desperation and creativity because you have no choice," Vex Thoth continued. "We have grown weak from easy victories over inferior opponents, but you have shown us what we were missing." Kane felt a chill of understanding. "You're not trying to win this battle. You're studying it." "Exactly. Every tactic your Admiral Chen uses, every innovation your engineers develop, every sacrifice your soldiers make, all of it is being recorded and analyzed. When this battle ends, I will have learned everything I need to know about human warfare." "And then?" Vex Thoth's smile was cold and terrible. "Then we will become as desperate and creative as you are. But with superior numbers and technology, the war will be over within a year." Kane realized that his victory had become humanity's doom. By proving that humans could defeat Vorthak forces, he had given the enemy exactly what they needed to adapt and overcome, unless he could stop the transmission of that tactical data. Kane looked around the command center and saw what he needed: the main communication array that was sending the battle analysis to the Vorthak home worlds. If he could destroy it, The lessons of this battle would die here on Blood Sand Prime. "Zix-9," Kane called out. His alien friend was at a nearby control station, still working to disrupt the defense platforms. "The communication array, can you overload it?" The insectoid engineer looked up, understanding immediately. "Yes, but we'll destroy entire command center. We die too." Kane looked out at the displays showing the space battle. Admiral Chen's remaining ships were fighting with the courage and desperation that had kept humanity alive for 3 years. They deserved better than to have their sacrifice turned into a weapon against their own people. "Do it," Kane said. Vex Thoth lunged for his weapon, but Kane was faster. The Supreme Commander fell without firing a shot, taking with him the greatest strategic mind the Vorthak had ever produced. Zix-9's claws flew over the control systems. Warning lights began flashing throughout the command center as power built up beyond safe levels. 30 seconds, the engineer reported. Kane activated the emergency communicator and sent a final message to Admiral Chen's flagship. "Mission complete. Intelligence secured. Get out now." Through the viewports, Kane could see the human ships already turning away from the battle. Their mission accomplished. They had come not just to rescue him, but to capture this entire facility with all its intelligence data about Vorthak operations. The command center began to shake as the overloading systems reached critical mass. Kane and Zix-9 stood together, watching the countdown on the displays. Around them, the greatest concentration of Vorthak military intelligence in the galaxy was about to vanish in nuclear fire. "Worth it?" Zix-9 asked in his clicking voice. Kane thought about his wife Sarah and daughter Emma, lost in the first alien attack on Earth. He thought about all the human worlds that still needed protecting. He thought about Admiral Chen's battered fleet limping home with enough captured intelligence to turn the tide of war. "Yeah," Kane said. "Worth it." The explosion lit up the night side of Blood Sand Prime like a new sun. When the light faded, the arena complex was gone, along with its command center, its strategic databases, and its supreme commander. But in the wreckage, rescue teams from Admiral Chen's fleet found something unexpected. Zix-9 had used his engineering skills to create a small shielded shelter in the seconds before the explosion. Kane and several other prisoners had survived, protected by the sacrifice of the insectoid engineer who had given his life to save them. Kane stood in the ruins of the arena where he had fought for his life, now surrounded by human marines who called him a hero. Above them, Admiral Chen's ships were already jumping back to hyperspace, carrying intelligence that would help humanity fight back against the Vorthak invasion. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years, humanity had hope. And sometimes, Kane thought as he looked up at the stars, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a soldier again, and he had work to do.